Welcome back, everyone, to the None of Our Businesses YouTube show and podcast, where we talk about the latest current events and news from an accountant's perspective. Not just one accountant, but we have three accountants here with me as always. We've got AJ Wheeler.
How's it going?
And Charlie Ziegmund.
Hey, everybody.
All right, well, let's get into this week's articles, guys.
Right on. All right, well, I got an article here from Forbes, and it looks like the SBA made further changes to PPP rules in their August 4th FAQs. So this was an FAQ on the loan forgiveness that was released, and they had a FAQ webinar. And so the author does a pretty good job of just kind of breaking it down on bullet points here. So compensation limitation for owner applies cumulatively across all businesses. So this is if an owner owns multiple businesses, the compensation limitation is capped over all businesses. Health insurance and retirement plan expenses are not included in the compensation cap for the before-mentioned owner employees, but are subject to additional limitations. So there was additional, limitations set on the amount of those fringe health and retirement benefits. And then transportation cost finally gets a definition under this. So payment for a service of the distribution of transportation. And then guidance on the calculation for reduction of loan forgiveness if wages and salaries of an employee is reduced by more than 25%. And then one that I found the most interesting is about the interest accrual. So I hadn't really thought about this much, but I guess interest is accruing even though you're not making payments on the loan, and it possibly is forgiven, but it's set to accrue since you got the loan, since it was issued to you. And in fact, they kind of give guidance on it. But at the end of it, if it's fully forgiven, you don't owe any of the accrued interest. But if partially forgiven, then you got to figure out how much accrued interest goes into that. So anyway, I'd like to get your guys' take on kind of these updates that came out of this FAQ. We could leave a link in the description too if somebody wants to look at like the TLDR on it. So.
Yeah, I mean, it addressed one of the things. I had a colleague who was telling me about this strategy, and it was odd to me. I hadn't even thought about it, that the idea of breaking a business or somebody who was self-employed or who was the owner employee of a business, basically getting a PPP loan across multiple businesses where they get compensated across multiple businesses, and therefore arbitraging against the wage limit for themselves by basically what the thought was up until now, up into these rules, was that you could your wage limit would be decided on a company by company basis as opposed to in total. And so I think that's part of what this rule is trying to address. I thought, oh yeah, I thought my colleague was like speaking to something pretty esoteric, but I guess maybe it has been a hot issue for them to address it as they did here. I don't personally have anything against any of the individual policies. I think the thing that stinks about it is that they're setting new policy on the program at this late date, that this wasn't obvious or in the CARES Act or in the initial policies, and now they're just coming out with it. I think that as a process thing is not cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. A lot of people have already made all the decisions that are built around this money. The only thing I'd say about it is that we've talked a couple of times on the podcast about what this program is designed to do and who it's for. And, there was some debate about whether or not it's supposed to protect employees' paychecks or, who exactly that money should be going to. And I think this clarifies a little bit that the intention was more around the employees. And a lot of these schemes to make more of the money go to the owner have been like specifically identified and stopped. So I think anything that just leads to that money going to employees is probably more in line with the intent of the law, or of the program.
Yeah, the way the article sounded, I thought there was going to be a big bombshell in here, but pretty much it's pretty standard with, I think, the adjustments they made. But to Ty's point, this late in the game, I think everybody's planned around, the rules that were in set and the kind of the policies that were set in place. And so this late in the game and this far into the process, the fact that like that's still not all ironed out is kind of just, I guess, befuddling to me, especially when applications for forgiveness are coming due, or they're already, people are essentially coming to the end of that 28-week extended period. They'll need to iron out the rest of it, I guess, is what I'm saying. Because I have a client, their bank has not even opened up a forgiveness application yet because they're trying to get their side of the thing ironed out. So.
Yeah, and especially when the nature of this thing is a kind of an emergency-oriented thing. So people need to be able to make decisions quick. And so the more uncertainty you install in the process, the more that people just can't do that. So yeah, I've got another article we can talk about from CNBC called "More than 93% of U.S. college students say tuition should be lowered if classes are online." And so, with this pandemic going on, everybody's working from home, changing to, a remote kind of solution. And so universities are no different. They're doing that same thing. And a lot of them are committing to it. But there's some backlash from students who they did a poll of 13,600 students who basically said that we believe it should be cheaper because we believe that the costs for the school have gone down. And at first when I read it, I was kind of like, well, yeah, that seems like it makes sense and, seems like a pretty reasonable conclusion. But as I thought about it more, the article brings up some good points that I hadn't maybe thought about. But there's a lot of cost to switching to an online thing. And then the other thing I thought about was that a lot of people who buy into a university, like if you go to Harvard, you're buying into that experience and that, the prestige that comes with that school. And so part of that is that they had to have these big buildings and these big campuses in order for you to want to be part of that system. And so I think when it comes time to where we can't use those facilities and people are now bought into a system that wasn't really well designed to handle this, and then they, step back and are outraged by it, it just seems a little silly to me because it's like, well, that's what you wanted. You wanted a prestigious school that had these great facilities, and part of that decision is buying into that system. And so I guess I just want to get you guys' take on whether or not you feel that it is correct inherently that businesses should, or that schools should charge a different rate when it's online.
I think it really depends on how they execute online. My experience having been on the faculty at Portland State University for over a decade and taught classes in person and then later online, and having taken curriculum that was originally designed to be taught in person and then bringing it online, I think that if you just do your same game plan, you take exactly what you did in person and you throw it up on a webcast or a video, and you don't do anything all that different than you would have done in person, then I think it is 100% true that you've lowered the cost. You've not made any major significant investments. There's some technology there, but in terms of the instructor's time and effort, you probably haven't invested a whole lot more in the development of the course, and you probably and your overall costs of delivery are probably going down compared to having done the same exact thing in a lecture hall. But I think that's a very naive way to think of how online learning is delivered. I imagine there are some out there that do that, unfortunately, but at least when I was at Portland State, they invested a lot in trying to redesign the classroom experience for the online format. And so, at least in many respects, it probably was more expensive, at least at first, until that initial investment gets amortized out over time. And certainly from the instructor's time and effort to, which is what I felt a lot, to kind of redesign the course in a way that worked better online. And, and their online opens opportunities with a big class to do things kind of interestingly enough that may be more personalized than when you're doing it in person. So I think if you do online right, and I've moved out of the education world, so I don't want to wade into or have people out there think that I'm proposing that I'm an expert in education and how online learning should be done. But but it's just, just my subjective opinion on that. I think if online learning's done right, it can have the same value. It can definitely cost the program money. It can provide the same or better value in some ways to students, and therefore there's not an obvious reason why the price for that education would go down if the online program is done quote unquote right.
I'd have to say that the thing that struck me about this article was kind of, I think, the intuitiveness of the general public as to what costs around that. I think, like Ty just spoke to from a teacher's perspective, and you want to provide a product that is not just a copy and paste from the PowerPoint slides that you would have presented in class and expanded upon. I think that takes you a lot of time, effort, and, for lack of a better word, production time and production value to put into place. On top of the fact that then you're trying to deliver what you would get in person online, and that includes maybe not a one-on-one, but the ability to ask questions and have something explained, or to have interactions with peers to be able to figure things out together. That again takes, like Ty talked about, a financial investment in tools that allow that, and those things don't come cheap. The reasons why the curriculum was the way it was is they had cost around buildings, teachers, supplies, the way things had been done, and now you're switching that. There's costs associated with that, and just because it's not in a brick and mortar school, or classroom, doesn't mean that there's not associated costs with delivering those services. So I see where they're coming from. I mean, school is expensive. I mean, just having been in school in the late 90s and went back to school in the 2000s, I mean, the cost was drastically different and keeps going up. So I understand the fact that they think maybe it should be lowered. But again, I think it's a misconception of where costs are being spent or how the public perceives costs.
I agree completely. I just want to say from my own personal experience, this is a little bit of a different issue, but kind of relates, is that I know that there's kind of a bias to think about software or intellectual property or, these kind of websites like this as something that's cheaper because it's online, but it's like you're saying, there's a lot of thought and process that goes into that. And so from my experience, working for a software company, thinking that somebody who had an up and running product wouldn't have to constantly put money into it to keep it going. And then seeing it in reality, it's well, no, like you said, there's so many operational costs to keeping that functional that I think most people aren't aware of unless they're exposed to it. So, yeah. All
right. Next article I got is actually one that probably people in Oregon, if you're listening to this, we're from Portland. But if you're watching us and you're not from a city or that borders another state, you might not have known about this. But the art is from CNN, and it's the title of the article is "Working from Home, You Might Owe Income Tax to 2 states." And so this gets back to an issue that we talked about on the podcast a while back, but it talks about that if you were, say, in New Jersey and you were working at an office building in New York, but now you're remotely working in New Jersey, then New York still may want some of your tax. And although there's been, a New York and New Jersey kind of ceasefire on going after those taxes, there's only, I guess, 13 states and the District of Columbia have addressed the 2020 specific situation of people working at home. That if you're working in one state and you're employed but you, for instance, actually physically worked in another state, you might owe both taxes related to your income. So I'd like to get your guys' take if you think this is probably something that most people should know, or if you think probably this is surprising to some people.
I was a little bit confused by the you'll be taxed by both concept, but it kind of, I think that just means my knowledge of multi-state taxation for folks like this is somewhat limited. But at least in Oregon, for example, or on the West Coast, set COVID aside, if you actually had a tax liability for the same work being generated in 2 states, the states have always had a mechanism where you get a credit in one state for the taxes paid in the other, so that you're not really being taxed by both. I think what I saw in the article, the statement that that this can be complicated and it may mean more or less taxes. I think that's true. It's like it could mean more in taxes in the sense that if you're working in multiple, if basically you have two states that think you owe and they initially calculate tax for you, and then you go to offset the tax with one with the other, it may be that the state that wins out, the one where you're paying more of the tax, is a state that has a higher rate than you previously reported in, right? So from that perspective, I think, yeah, it could work out that you're actually paying more tax than you were before because of this. But yeah, I thought the line that you could be actually paying tax, the same tax to two states. I'm not sure that's exactly what they were saying. I read the article a couple times trying to see if they were saying that, and I don't think they necessarily were. It was just kind of a weird way I read it. But but just to kind of throw that down, I don't think it's actually the case in most situations that you'd be literally paying the same tax to both states. It definitely can confuse your situation, but and you definitely would probably pay to the state that has the higher rate. Ultimately, you'd pay at the higher rate, is what I should say, but you wouldn't be paying tax twice on the same amount in that regard.
I guess my only kind of thought on it that I would like to talk about, I guess, is there's this kind of built-in assumption that you shouldn't pay income tax to two states, and that seems reasonable, right? Like you shouldn't. But then when you think about it, it's like, well, it depends on whether or not you agree with that depends on what you think that tax is supposed to pay for. And so if you feel, if the fact that you make money from a company in Missouri or whatever comes from the fact that things were done in that government to enable that to happen, then even though you're in another state, I could see why somebody would make an argument that you still have some obligation to the state that enabled that whole thing to happen in the first place. And so I feel like both sides of the coin have an argument to the tax. I don't know what the technically correct answer is, and I don't want to give an opinion on that. I'm just more interested in the kind of theoretical, which state should get that money, because it's kind of both, in my opinion.
Well, I think what you just said, you said it right. It highlights kind of what confused me about the article, but the way you said it, I think clears that up, is that, I mean, you very well could be literally paying tax, like you could be writing a check to two states. That very well could happen, right? But you're not paying the same dollars to both states, is what, and I think that part could be a little bit misleading. But because to your point, it's like, yeah, I mean, conceptually or philosophically, if you're using services across two states, why wouldn't you pay to both states? The point of that is that you're only one person, you only have 24 hours in a day. It's impossible that you're using the same services across both states at the same time. So you shouldn't have to pay under that premise that you're like covering as if you're like in two places at once. You shouldn't be paying like that. But it's quite possible, if you we're talking philosophical now, we're not talking actual state laws or regulations, but you can think about it like if you spent 12 hours in one state of your day and 12 hours in the other state of your day, should each of those states get some chunk of you because of the services they provide for the 12 hours you were there for each of those for that day? I'd say, yeah, sure, why not? Makes sense. But both states are providing services in that case.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm at. That's what I'm onto, is just like, and the service might not be levied directly on you as well. Perhaps you live in a state, and so the police service that you pay for in your tax can only help you in the state you live in, but the roads system that you're using in another state to work for a company that drives across those roads or whatever, in some way you use the services of a state you work for. And so, I don't know. I just thought that was an interesting topic.
Okay. You're up next, Charlie.
I put a freeze-dried mango in my whiskey.
Yeah.
I let it rehydrate, and then
Good.
I just ate it. That thing's pretty spicy.
Nice.
Now I feel like I should go get a glass of whiskey.
That is Westward whiskey with a freeze-dried
mango
in it.
It's called the Thai. It's called the Mai Tai Special.
Yes, the Mai Tai Special.
All right, so I've got another article we can talk about. There was an article in Forbes called Stimulus Package Agreement Expected by Friday, but still not confirmed. And this was posted a couple of days ago. I picked it a couple of days ago, hoping that it would be confirmed by now, and it looks like it hasn't. Basically, what's happening is that the $600 federal unemployment benefit is now over, and Democrats and Republicans are arguing about how the second stimulus package should look and where that money should go. Mnuchin says there's no way we can spend $3.4 trillion. That's just ridiculous. And the other issues that they were kind of struggling with were whether or not what rate to extend unemployment and how much aid should go to state and local governments. Senate was set to recess today and was supposed to have come to some kind of conclusion. And I looked up another article that said that they had not. And so I was curious to see if you guys had any thoughts on maybe how this will play out or how it should play out from your perspective and in your opinion.
Well, yeah, I did the same thing, Charlie. I Googled whether or not they had reached an agreement, and there was an article posted about 2 hours ago. What is it, Friday the August 7th, that they had left chambers and they had not reached an agreement. So I think, it's an election year and it's and everybody's bickering on both sides of the aisle. And I think, everybody's extended unemployment expired July 31st, and we're 7 days into August, and there hasn't even been a temporary extension. I was seeing on the news this morning that unemployment's at a 2.5% rate or something like that. So it's not quite as bad as the Great Recession, but I think something needs to be done to help people out. I'm just not sure what that is, and it seems like they're almost splitting hairs at this point in this process, I guess, in this election year.
Yeah, I don't like to kind of think of, I don't like to wade into predicting what will happen from a political standpoint. I've got colleagues who do that, who kind of say, hey, these certain tax laws haven't been passed yet, but I think, we can expect the following laws and regulations are going to come because we just think that's where political will is. But I've always avoided doing that and not just getting into that kind of discussion. I can say what I'd like to have happen, whether it will or not. And I'd say I'd go back to what I've said on previous shows. I have a very simplistic view of the economy. It's a consumer economy, and I want the consumers to have money to buy things. So I would like the stimulus to be passed, and I'd like people to get money. And I'm not as altruistic perhaps as AJ, who talks about it from the standpoint of helping people out. I just want them to have money so they can spend it, because I believe that will help me out, because it'll be a good economy that way. And that's how I look at it, very, very simply. But also on this, breaking news here on Friday, I was looking at social media, and same thing you guys saw, that they didn't come to an agreement. And what I'm seeing is that there's reports that Mnuchin is the Treasury Secretary is advising President Trump to just take executive action to provide some kind of stimulus by executive order, because Congress didn't come to a conclusion. So again, I don't know if that will happen or not, but that's one thing being talked about.
That makes sense. And I just want to say, you'll be happy to know the article was mentioning that there was going to be, what was on the table was another $1,200 individual benefit, so that each person can spend a little bit more.
Yes,
and,
excellent. Go out and buy shit, please.
Yes.
I think George Bush got in trouble for saying that after 9/11, I think. So maybe people are going to think I'm crazy for saying that. But I do kind of think that's how it works. Yeah.
We've all been through a lot since then, so I think it's fine now. You can take that stance.
Yes, buy more stuff by all means. All right, my last article for this week, and I'd like to get your guys' take on this. This was kind of a throwaway article for me, but I thought it was kind of interesting. So, why small town might become the sexiest brand in the world. So the gist of the article is, working from home, he's expecting, the writer of this article, work from home will invite more people to experience small town life, and then this will drive more small business opportunities in those small towns. Because what he's basically saying is something we talked about last week on the podcast, is kind of like an exodus from cities. There's no reason to live in a densely populated metropolis that's, notoriously has high land and home ownership cost associated with it. And now that everybody's working from remotely or working from home, that they'll move away from those towns. And what this will do is create a boom for smaller towns and needing small town sourcing for food and services for these people that will come into this community. So I'd like to get your guys' take on whether you think this is like actually like a thing that could happen, or is this guy just kind of, small towns hold a good place in his heart, and he's hoping that this will bring back a small town America.
I think it's very time frame specific, the idea, and it depends on how long the pandemic continues, right? Because I don't remember if it was the podcast or another conversation that I was having, but I mean, I think the draw of urban areas is the things that you can do, the restaurants you can go to, the shops that you can enter, the diversity that you can experience because of just the sheer numbers, all within easy reach of where you live. That's why those of us who live either downtown or closer into downtown, that's why we would do that. And if your offices are downtown, then the idea that you have a really easy commute and all of that. That's what drives you to live in the urban environments. And right now, all of that is shut down. So the benefit of living downtown or the benefit of living in a city has been curtailed. So yeah, it's not surprising that when the benefits of an activity like living in the city are curtailed, living out is more attractive. But do I believe that is a long term, that'll be an ongoing trend long term? No, I think that as soon as the benefits of being able to live in a city come back, then those benefits are ageless. They're things that people will always want to flock to if they value them. I mean, as a practical matter, I've enjoyed living close in. I live in the Portland area. I used to live downtown. I now live close into downtown, but not downtown. And I've enjoyed that closeness for a variety of reasons. But I also could see myself really enjoying living out and in a small town long term. But that's unrelated to COVID. I mean, it's just that is something that I could see myself enjoying doing. And so, yeah, I think the folks who want to live out of downtown always, or out of the city, that have that inclination is there. It was there before COVID. It would be there after COVID. But yeah, I think that the article is too time specific. It's too centered on a current circumstance that isn't going to last.
And I might mention, when you talk about amenities, if I can speak right, that, when you're living in a small town like that, there's no 24-hour, grocery store to go to. Things shut down at 10 p.m., or 9 p.m. on a Sunday. So, it'd probably take some adjustment there to, you can't just run out for eggs on a Sunday morning at 7 a.m. You got to wait for the local IGA to open up or whatever it is. So I think, this romantic view that the country or small town living is somehow, you just pick up and there's no adjustment to make there. Also, I would note, you need to make sure the small town you're moving into has a proper internet speed to be able to, for you to be able to work remotely. It doesn't do you any good if you're having to tether off your 1G phone that barely works on the edge of town,
Yeah, Charlie. Yeah, before you jump in, Charlie and I have a colleague, a contact who got this kind of Airbnb. No, it's not an Airbnb, but he got this big property that theoretically could be a B&B out in the country. I'm totally jealous. It's like 40 acres. It's like awesome, lifelong kind of thing that he's wanted, and something that I kind of would want to, kind of thing. So loving it or whatever. But I was trying to have a call with him the other day, and he dropped my call like 3 or 4 times because of the because of the reception, and he couldn't make it work on Wi-Fi either. And so, yeah, what you just said, that's a real that's a real practical issue.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And I also want to talk about it just from the standpoint of somebody who I came from Wyoming. And so I don't know if you guys have been to Wyoming or not, but if you live in a big city and you think to yourself, I want to live out in the country and I just want to live somewhere where it's cheap, Wyoming's the place to do it. But I just want to say, like, I strongly urge you to really think about whether or not that's right for you and your lifestyle. And to give you an example of this, there's a place in Wyoming called Chugwater, and it's like this really small town that nobody really wants to be in. And so what they did is they did this program where they said, you can just come build, if you want land in Chugwater, you can just have it. All you have to do is build a house and live there for 1 year, and you can have the land. And you know who did it? Nobody. Because the price of living in Chugwater is living in Chugwater, and it's basically, you're not getting away with nothing there. And they have this website. It's like great because there's like a Chugwater website, and it shows them trying to build roads, but the roads lead to nowhere. So there's like just this gigantic open field with a sidewalk that leads into it, and it's like one of the saddest things that I've ever seen. But I personally love Wyoming and I have nothing against it. I just think that for you, if you want that kind of lifestyle, you have to actually commit to it. And that means no phone, like you're saying. That means no, having these amenities. And then just like one more interesting thing was that, like in Chugwater, what happened was there was one gas station and Google would send everybody to it. And one day somebody got drunk and drove into the gas station and set it on fire. And Google didn't know that had happened. So Google just told everybody who drove through there as truckers to just like go to that gas station and get some gas. And what ended up happening is a bunch of people got stuck in Chugwater because there's nothing anywhere near it. And, it's kind of this purgatory nightmare. But the point is, if you like that, that's where you do it. And so, yeah, I just want to share that thought.
I totally want to go look up Chugwater and see if this is something I'd want to do. Like go live in Chugwater for a year. Yeah.
All I got to say is look at the pictures first. Don't make it close right now.
In a month, I'll just be retired from the podcast and take my $5,000 in savings to Chugwater and build a stick home,
yeah,
on my own, dig my own well,
yeah,
shoot varmint. Tiffany will be eating raccoon and possum. I mean, we're set. Free land. I'm all over this.
It is. So yeah, I thought that was a good article because I had a lot of personal opinion on that one. So I got one more article we can talk about from the New York Times. There's an article called "Businesses Thought They Were Covered by the Pandemic, but Insurers Say No." And so what's happened is a bunch of businesses have, with foresight, they bought this business interruption insurance that was designed to protect their business from lost revenues due to events that were beyond their control. And so like some examples were like the Houston Rockets. There was a kitchen called Chez Panisse. And basically, they are all getting denied because the insurers are saying that it's not a covered, this pandemic is not a covered event. And so what's happened is a bunch of them have gotten together. 400 businesses have started business interruption lawsuits against insurers. And the way that the insurers have kind of defended themselves from this is that back when SARS happened, a lot of them changed the verbiage in their contracts to say that there needed to be direct physical damage to the premises in order to have a valid business interruption claim. And it's one of those things that when you're signing it, it sounds pretty reasonable. Like that seems like something you would want to insure, and it is, but a bunch of people didn't have didn't have direct physical damage to their premises, and they're getting nothing out of these insurance companies. And so I guess I just wanted to kind of talk about whether or not you feel that's right, whether or not it's the problem of people understanding their insurance policies well enough, or whether or not this is just insurance trying to not pay.
Well, I mean, I think about this you can look at this from two different sides or two different angles, of course. And I think if you look at it from the standpoint of, okay, the businesses got the insurance, something happened, depending on how you interpret the contract, maybe you could get a payout. Let's do whatever we can to get what we can out of this, right? I understand that, and I don't have a problem with it. I think that, businesses trying to see if it's possible that their insurers can cover their losses in this case, even if even if that wouldn't have been a reasonable thought on the forefront, seeing what they can do to get money out of it now is something I think, I don't blame them for that, I would say. But if you look at it from the other perspective, if you ask the question, is it reasonable to buy insurance to insure against worldwide catastrophes? No. And it reminds me, I actually worked with an accounting firm once that actually they were paying extra money to deal with data. So they had data in the cloud, they had data on an on-site server, and then they were also paying money for their data and systems to be backed up to some kind of fancy underground cave kind of facility somewhere in the event that there was a major catastrophe that wiped out the building that we worked in and also took down the cloud-based systems that we relied on, which were third-party companies, right? So we're talking like a national or worldwide disaster. In theory, we had the systems to be up and running and keep working because of this extra backup process that we had going. And and I was like, this is the most ridiculous premise ever, right? Because in the event of that disaster, I guarantee you that I personally am not doing any accounting work, right? Like that, I don't need to be up and running the next day. That's not going to happen. What I do is not that important. And so, it's just, the premise is ridiculous, right? And yet I think that's a very extreme example, but I think this kind of thing happens a lot where people they insure for the apocalypse without actually asking the realistic question of, will I even be around to cash out in the apocalypse, right? It doesn't make any sense. And so I would say on the front end of it, it doesn't really seem reasonable. If somebody was asking me, hey, should I buy insurance against a potential worldwide pandemic or a worldwide disaster? I'd say no, because if there truly is a worldwide disaster, even if somebody would sign you up for a contract like that, how would they have the money to pay out across the entire worldwide? It just would never work anyway. It's a house of cards. So I'd say it's not a good scheme to buy into on the front end. It's not reasonable on the front end to make that kind of investment as a business. But on the back end, if you made the investment or you didn't, whatever the facts are, but you're just trying to get a payout because you think maybe the language allows for it, okay, go for it. But I would say we have to recognize that your business is not like unique. Every business is suffering due to the pandemic in some way, and they all would like to make claims. And obviously, if they do so, there is no money. It would be impossible for the insurer to finance all of those claims if that were to actually work that way.
Now, the article makes that point, and I do agree with it, and the executives are taking that same stance, and I think it's right. The one thing it brought up that is an interesting concept that I hadn't thought about is the idea of reinsurance, which is like when an insurer has too much risk concentrated in one place, that insurer actually buys insurance against that issue. And so I think you're totally right. If every business is failing, there is no insurance company that's going to be able to even reinsure that issue. I think there's an in-between that maybe helps a broader scope where some otherwise uninsurable risks could become insurable through reinsurance. But this isn't one of them, I agree.
Yeah, it just depends on how system-wide the crisis is, right? Because even in this case, I could argue against myself and point out that there are some businesses, there are some places where money is that haven't been negatively impacted by the pandemic. So, potentially insuring those who are with the funds of those who aren't might work. But I don't know exactly where that analysis goes. But if you consider if you're insuring against a natural disaster that happens in one area of the country, the rest of the country is there to help support that, right? So that kind of insurance can kind of make sense, right? But when it affects the entire country, there's no one to pay.
Well, I, for one, was shocked that some insurance company was trying to get out of paying insurance, paying the people that were insured. Because I just never heard of that before, Of course, I'm being facetious. I've known plenty of insurance agents and insurance adjusters over my years. And that's the goal of insurance, to have you pay for it and then they don't have to pay out on it. That's why there's limits. That's why there's clauses. acts of God clauses in there. So yeah, I've seen lots of different insurance. Schemes, I guess, for lack of a better word. But me personally, in my own personal life, I only purchase insurance on things that are required, and that goes for like auto and home insurance and professional liability insurances and stuff like that. But other insurance coverages is kind of like an extended warranty for me. It's like you're betting on something failing, and if it fails, you probably should have bought something else or planned better in the first place anyway. So I guess my heart isn't bleeding too much for people that took out pandemic insurance or like Ty's example of backing up data in a third way that it would basically take a worldwide disaster. I definitely wouldn't want to be up and running that day. I would be fashioning my keyboard into a spear and survival mode. So yeah, no, I wouldn't be crunching somebody's tax return or audit or financial records,
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And I think we can kind of tell that the insurance agencies are being scummy here, because even the Cheers bar, the bar from the show Cheers, filed a lawsuit against them. And we all just know how laid back that bar is. And so for them to bring a suit up, it's really, really a big issue.
All right. Thanks for watching. That's our show. Make sure you click the subscribe notification bell down there. Leave a comment if you disagree or agree with anything we had to say. And if it was good, give it a thumbs up. If it was trash, you can give it a thumbs down. And we'll see you next week. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, everybody.